There are people who look perfectly fine on the outside. They have jobs, they have relationships, they function. But on the inside, something feels off. They feel disconnected, like they're watching their own life happen from behind glass. They struggle to feel close to people, even people they care about. They have a hard time knowing what they want or what they feel. And when someone asks them what's wrong, they can't explain it, because nothing obvious is wrong. There was no dramatic event, no clear trauma, no villain to point to. Just a quiet, persistent sense that something was missing. And because they can't name it, they assume the problem is them, that they're broken for no reason, that everyone else learned how to be human and somehow they missed the lesson. If that feeling sounds familiar, if you've spent years trying to figure out why you struggle in ways that don't make sense, this might be the answer you've been looking for. Because what looks like nothing on the surface can still leave deep marks. What feels like emptiness is often the result of something that should have been there but wasn't. And that absence, that lack of something essential during childhood, has a name. It's called neglect. But not the kind most people think of. Not the kind that shows up in news stories or gets reported to authorities. The kind that happens quietly, in homes that look normal, with parents who weren't cruel, just unavailable, who provided everything except the one thing a child's brain needs most: emotional presence. When we hear the word neglect, most of us think of extreme cases: a child left alone for days, a child who isn't fed, a child living in obvious danger. And those are real and serious. But there's another form of neglect that flies under the radar: emotional neglect. This is what happens when a child's physical needs are met, but their emotional needs are ignored. When they're fed, clothed, and housed, but no one asks how they feel. No one notices when they're sad. No one helps them make sense of their emotions. No one creates a space where it's safe to need something. This kind of neglect doesn't involve hitting or yelling. It doesn't involve cruelty. It can happen in a home where parents are present but distracted, where they're overwhelmed by their own problems, where they're emotionally shut down themselves and simply don't have the capacity to attune to a child's inner world. The child isn't abused. They're just unseen, unheard, left to figure out their emotional life completely alone. And because there's no obvious harm, no clear bad guy, the child grows up thinking everything was fine. They don't have a story to tell. They don't have a reason to feel the way they feel, so they blame themselves. But here's what actually happens in the brain of a child experiencing emotional neglect. The human brain is wired for connection. From birth, a child's nervous system is designed to seek out a caregiver for more than just food and safety. They need emotional regulation. They need someone to mirror their feelings back to them, to show them that what they're experiencing is real and manageable. When a baby cries and a caregiver responds with warmth and attunement, the baby's nervous system learns that distress can be soothed, that emotions are temporary, that reaching out for help works. This is how emotional regulation develops, not through lectures or instructions, but through repeated experiences of being seen and responded to. When that response isn't there, when a child's emotions are ignored or dismissed, the brain adapts. It has to, because the child still needs to survive. So the nervous system learns a different lesson. It learns that expressing needs doesn't lead to comfort, that showing emotion doesn't bring help, that the safest thing to do is shut down, stop asking, stop expecting, handle everything internally. This isn't a conscious decision, it's a survival mechanism. The child's brain is doing what it's designed to do: adapt to the environment it's in. And if that environment is emotionally barren, the brain learns to function without emotional support.
Over time, this creates specific patterns. The child becomes hyper-independent. They learn to solve their own problems because no one else is going to. They learn to suppress their feelings because expressing them leads nowhere. They learn to observe and analyze everything around them because they can't rely on anyone to explain what's happening or tell them they're safe. They become incredibly self-sufficient on the outside, but on the inside, they're alone, completely alone. And that aloneness becomes so familiar that it starts to feel normal. They don't even realize they're carrying it. This is why adults who experienced emotional neglect as children often describe feeling like they're faking their way through life, like everyone else got a manual on how to be a person and they didn't, because they actually didn't. The manual is written through early emotional experiences, through being held when you're scared, through having someone name your feelings for you when you're too young to understand them yourself, through learning that it's okay to need people, that vulnerability doesn't equal weakness, that connection is safe. Children who don't get those experiences grow up without that foundation, and they spend the rest of their lives trying to build a house on ground that was never prepared. As adults, this shows up in predictable ways. One of the most common is difficulty trusting people, not because they've been betrayed in dramatic ways, but because their earliest relationship, the one with their caregiver, taught them that people don't show up emotionally. So even when they meet someone trustworthy, someone who genuinely cares, they can't fully let them in. They keep a part of themselves hidden. They stay guarded. They test people without meaning to. They wait for the other person to leave or lose interest, because that's what feels familiar. Trust was never built in childhood, so it doesn't exist as a baseline in adulthood. Another common pattern is emotional numbness. People who grew up emotionally neglected often describe feeling like they're going through the motions, like they're watching their life happen, but not really living it. This isn't depression in the traditional sense, it's disconnection. The brain learned early on that emotions were pointless, that no one was going to respond to them anyway, so it turned the volume down, way down, to the point where the person can't access their feelings even when they want to. They know something is wrong, but they can't feel it. They know they should be sad or angry or hurt, but when they reach for the emotion, it's not there. Just numbness, just static. There's also a deep, pervasive fear of asking for help, because asking for help as a child didn't work. Either it was ignored, or it was met with irritation, or it simply went unnoticed. So the child learned to stop asking. And that pattern doesn't go away just because they grow up. As adults, they'll push themselves to the point of collapse before admitting they need support. They'll struggle in silence. They'll handle everything alone even when people are offering to help. Not because they're stubborn, but because their nervous system has been trained to see asking for help as dangerous, as something that leads to disappointment or shame, so they just don't. Overachievement is another response. Many people who were emotionally neglected become extremely high-functioning. They excel at work. They take on too much. They're perfectionists. They're driven. And from the outside, it looks like success. But on the inside, it's survival. Because achievement was the only way to get attention as a child, the only way to feel valuable. Grades, awards, accomplishments, those got noticed. Emotions didn't. So the brain locked onto that. It learned that productivity equals worth, that being useful equals being loved. And now, as an adult, they can't stop. They can't rest, because rest feels like disappearing, and disappearing feels like death. There's also a pattern of being drawn to emotionally unavailable people. This one confuses people the most. They wonder why they keep ending up in relationships where they're the one doing all the work, where they're the one reaching out, trying to connect, trying to get the other person to open up. And the answer is that it's familiar. Emotional unavailability was their first relationship template, so even though it hurts, it feels like home. They're unconsciously recreating the dynamic they grew up with, trying to earn love from someone who can't give it, hoping that this time, if they just try hard enough, they'll finally be seen. But they won't, because they're choosing people who can't see them, just like their caregivers couldn't. What makes childhood emotional neglect so difficult to identify is that it doesn't look like trauma. There's no event, no moment you can point to and say, that's when it happened. It's the opposite. It's all the moments that should have happened but didn't. All the times you needed comfort and didn't get it. All the times you felt something and had no one to help you understand it. All the times you were alone in a room full of people. Those absences don't create memories the way traumatic events do. They create gaps, and gaps are invisible. So when someone asks you about your childhood, you say it was fine, because it was. Nothing bad happened, and you genuinely believe that, because you're comparing your experience to abuse, to things that are obviously harmful, and your experience doesn't fit that category, so you dismiss it.
But dismissing your own pain is itself a symptom of neglect,
Because when a child's feelings are repeatedly ignored, they internalize the message that their feelings don't matter, that their pain isn't real unless it's extreme, that they don't have the right to struggle unless someone hit them or starved them or screamed at them. This is why so many adults who grew up neglected will say things like, "Other people had it worse," or "I shouldn't complain," or "I don't have a reason to feel this way." They've been trained to minimize their own suffering, to compare it to something more dramatic and decide theirs doesn't count. But trauma isn't a competition. It's not about who had it worse. It's about impact. And the impact of growing up emotionally invisible is real, even if it's quiet, even if it's hard to explain. This experience also creates a set of core beliefs that operate underneath everything. Beliefs like, "My needs don't matter," "I shouldn't take up space," "I have to handle everything alone," "If I need someone, I'm weak." These beliefs weren't taught with words. They were taught through experience, through being a child who needed emotional support and not getting it, through learning that expressing a need led to nothing. So the child concluded that the need itself was the problem, that they were too much, too needy, too sensitive, and they learned to shrink, to manage their own emotions, to never burden anyone, to be as small and self-sufficient as possible. As adults, these beliefs run everything. They dictate who you choose to be in relationships, how much you share, how much you ask for, how much space you allow yourself to take up. They make you feel guilty for having needs. They make you feel like you're failing when you can't handle something on your own. They make you believe that independence is strength and dependence is weakness, when in reality, the ability to rely on others is a sign of healthy development. It's a skill, one that emotionally neglected children never get to build. So what does healing look like? The first and most important step is awareness, not fixing, not solving, just seeing, because most people who grew up emotionally neglected don't even realize that's what happened. They've spent their entire lives thinking the problem is them, that they're too sensitive or too distant or too broken, and naming the actual cause, understanding that their struggles are not random but are direct responses to an environment that didn't meet their emotional needs, is profound. It reframes everything. It stops being, "What's wrong with me?" and starts being, "What happened to me?" And that shift from self-blame to self-compassion is where real change begins. It also helps to understand that the behaviors you developed, the hyper-independence, the emotional numbness, the fear of asking for help, those weren't failures. They were adaptations. They were your nervous system doing exactly what it needed to do to survive in an environment where emotional support wasn't available. You didn't choose to become this way. You learned to become this way because it was the safest option. And recognizing that these patterns served a purpose, that they protected you when you needed protection, makes it easier to approach them with kindness instead of judgment. Healing also involves learning that your needs are not a burden, that wanting connection is not weakness, that feeling things deeply is not too much. These are messages that emotionally neglected children never received, so they have to learn them now, as adults, through relationships that are different, through people who show up, who stay, who prove over time that reaching out doesn't lead to rejection. This process is slow. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to feel uncomfortable, because letting people in, after spending a lifetime keeping them out, feels terrifying, but it's the only way forward. Understanding the nervous system also helps. When you realize that your brain adapted to an environment of emotional scarcity, it makes sense that your default mode is shutdown or hypervigilance. It makes sense that rest feels impossible, that trust feels dangerous, that